Sevastopol is a city with a special destiny. Located on the southwestern coast of the Crimean Peninsula, for centuries it served as Russia's key outpost on the Black Sea. Not just a port or a military base, but an impregnable fortress that protected the country's southern borders. By the beginning of 1941, Sevastopol represented a powerful, fortified area with a developed system of coastal artillery capable of controlling a significant part of the water area. The legendary Black Sea Fleet, the pride of the Soviet naval forces, was based here. A fortress city, a defender city whose fate is inextricably linked with the history of the fleet and the defense of the state. On the eve of the Great Patriotic War, the geopolitical situation in the Black Sea region was heating up. Germany, rapidly expanding its sphere of influence in Europe, looked at Crimea with particular attention. For Hitler, Sevastopol was not just a military target, it was a symbol, the capture of which was supposed to demonstrate the might of the Third Reich. For the Soviet Union, the city was a strategic key to domination in the Black Sea and the protection of the country's southern industrial regions. Both sides understood, whoever controls Sevastopol controls the entire region. The history of Sevastopol, as a symbol of Russian military glory, began long before the Great Patriotic War. The first heroic defense of the city took place during the Crimean War of 1854–55. Then, resisting the combined forces of Britain, France, Turkey, and Sardinia, the Russian defenders held out for 349 days. Under the leadership of Admirals Kornilov, Nakhimov, and Istomin, ordinary citizens, along with the military, erected fortifications, repelled assaults, and endured continuous bombardments. Even though they lost that battle, Russia achieved a moral victory, and Sevastopol forever inscribed its name in the history of military valor. It was then that a special Sevastopol character was born, an unbending resilience in the face of a superior enemy. Tolstoy, who served on the bastions of the besieged city, captured this spirit in his Sevastopol sketches. The defense became a national symbol, and the names of its heroes are immortalized in the names of streets, squares, and ships. In the interwar period, Sevastopol became the most powerful naval base of the Soviet Union. From 1920 to 1941, a modern defense system was created here, taking into account the lessons of the past. Engineers designed unique coastal batteries, capable of hitting targets at a distance of up to 30 kilometers. The guns were placed in armored turrets and casemates carved into the rocks. Underground communications connected key facilities, and the air defense system covered the city from the air. Both historical defenses of Sevastopol, separated by almost a century, demonstrate striking parallels. In both cases, the defenders resisted a technologically superior enemy, relying on the advantages of the terrain and fortifications. Both defenses lasted about a year, becoming a test of the national spirit. However, there were also fundamental differences. While in the Crimean War the main threat was naval artillery and infantry, in 1941, tanks, aviation, and motorized units played a decisive role. The strategic importance of Sevastopol remained unchanged: control over the Black Sea and the southern direction. The city was not just a military base, but a symbol of the state's naval power. For the German command, the capture of Sevastopol meant not only a tactical success, but also a powerful propaganda trump card: the fall of the Russian Gibraltar. By June 1941, the Sevastopol defensive region presented an imposing system of fortifications, created with consideration for the unique local terrain. The city was encircled by 3 defensive lines, with a total length of approximately 50 kilometers. The first ran 15 to 20 kilometers from the city, the second 10 to 12, and the third directly encompassed the city outskirts. This was a true shield, protecting the main base of the Black Sea Fleet from a possible land attack. A particular source of pride for the defensive system were the coastal batteries. The 30th Battery, a true underground fort with 2 turret installations, each armed with 3 305mm caliber guns. Its reinforced concrete casemates extended to a depth of up to 30 meters, housing ammunition depots, a power station, a hospital, and barracks for personnel. The 35th Battery, a twin of the 30th, was located on Cape Chersonesos and also featured powerful armored turrets. These were supplemented by dozens of stationary and mobile batteries of smaller caliber, positioned along the entire perimeter of the bay. The city's air defense included over 100 anti-aircraft guns of various calibers, searchlight installations, and barrage balloons. Anti-aircraft batteries were positioned on high ground, providing circular coverage of the airspace. Fighter aircraft were based at the Belbek and Kachinsky airfields, ready to intercept enemy aircraft approaching the city. The strategic placement of artillery positions allowed for control not only of sea approaches, but also for fire support of ground units. Large-caliber guns could engage targets at a range of up to 30 kilometers, creating an insurmountable barrier for enemy ships and providing fire support to ground troops. Many batteries had a circular firing sector, allowing them to engage both sea and land targets. At the beginning of the war, the Black Sea Fleet comprised 1 battleship, 6 cruisers, 17 destroyers, 47 submarines, and numerous auxiliary vessels. The flagship was the battleship Parizhskaya Kommuna, armed with 12 305mm caliber guns. The cruisers Krasny Kavkaz, Krasny Krim, and Chervona Ukraina could provide powerful artillery support from the sea. October 1941. German troops, having broken through the defenses on the Perekop Isthmus, rapidly advanced deep into the Crimean Peninsula. The 11th Army of the Wehrmacht, under the command of Colonel General Erich von Manstein, one of Hitler's most talented strategists, had a clear objective: to capture Sevastopol with a lightning strike, preventing the Soviet command from organizing a defense. Manstein relied on the well-practiced blitzkrieg tactics that had previously brought the Germans success on other fronts. But Sevastopol was preparing to fight. On October 30th, advanced units of the 50th German Infantry Division reached the city's outer defensive perimeter. The heroic 250-day defense of Sevastopol began. The city's defenders found themselves in an extremely difficult situation. The main forces of the Primorsky Army were still retreating from Odessa, and the Black Sea Fleet could only allocate limited forces of Marines and coastal units for the defense. At this critical moment, Vice Admiral Philip Sergeyevich Oktyabrski took command of the defense. He made a decision that changed the course of the battle: to use naval artillery to support ground troops. The cruisers Krasny Kavkaz and Chervona Ukraina anchored in Severnaya Bay and opened fire on the advancing German units. The heavy shells of the naval guns literally plowed through the enemy's positions, forcing them to halt their offensive. The first assault on Sevastopol began on November 4. Manstein threw 2 divisions into the attack at once: the 50th and 22nd Infantry, supported by tanks and aviation. The main blow fell on the Bakhchisarai direction, where the Germans hoped to break through to the city. The defense here was held by scattered units of the 8th Marine Brigade and detachments of the People's Militia. Yesterday's workers, merchant sailors, and students. Coastal artillery became the true steel shield of Sevastopol, transforming the city into an impregnable fortress. Powerful guns, ranging from 100 to 305 millimeters in caliber, controlled not only the sea approaches but also land directions, becoming a nightmare for the advancing German troops. A special role in the defense was played by the famous 30th and 35th turret batteries, true masterpieces of military engineering art. The 30th Battery, commanded by Captain Georgy Alexander, was located on the northern side of the city. Its 12-inch guns could send 500-kilogram shells up to 30 kilometers. An armor-piercing shell of such a caliber could penetrate the armor of any ship, and a high-explosive shell, upon hitting a concentration of equipment, destroyed all living things within a 100-meter radius. The Germans nicknamed this battery Maxim Gorky 1 and considered its destruction a priority. During the first assault on Sevastopol in November 41, it was the fire of the 30th Battery that halted the advance of the German 50th Infantry Division. When German tanks broke through to the village of Belbek, the battery commander made a daring decision: to turn the guns to fire at ground targets. This required the highest skill from the crews, as naval guns were not intended for fighting mobile ground targets. But the artillerymen coped. With 4 volleys, they destroyed 18 tanks and stopped the offensive. The 35th Battery, located on Cape Chersonesos, became the last line of defense in June 42. Under the command of Major Alexander Leshchenko, it continued to fire even when the Germans had already entered the city. A legendary episode occurred on June 17th, when the battery repelled an attack by German bombers. Lieutenant Vorobyov's anti-aircraft crew shot down 4 Junkers, but was itself destroyed by a direct bomb hit. Then the main caliber gunners took over the anti-aircraft guns. Never having fired anti-aircraft guns, they managed to shoot down 2 more planes. The technical characteristics of the coastal batteries were striking. The turret installations of the 30th and 35th Batteries had circular firing, armor up to 300 millimeters thick, and autonomous power supply systems. Underground structures went to a depth of up to 35 meters, where ammunition depots, barracks, hospitals, and command posts were located. Each battery could operate autonomously for a month, even when completely cut off from the outside world. In addition to the main calibers, the defense of Sevastopol was provided by dozens of medium and small caliber batteries. The 122 mm guns of Battery Number 18 on Malakoff-Kurgan, under the command of Senior Lieutenant Drapushko, became a real curse for German infantry. The crews of this battery destroyed more than 50 enemy firing points and repelled 17 attacks during the defense. The defense of Sevastopol was organized on a sectoral principle, taking into account the complex terrain. The entire perimeter was divided into 4 sectors, each with its own command and autonomous supply system. The first sector covered the northern direction, the second, the eastern, the third, the southern, and the fourth, the western coast. This structure allowed for efficient maneuvering of forces and assets, concentrating them on the most threatened directions. The engineering of the positions was impressive in its thoughtfulness. Multi-tiered full-profile trenches were connected by communication passages, forming a unified system that allowed for the covert movement of troops. In front of the forward edge of the defense, minefields were created with a density of up to 1,000 mines per kilometer of front. Anti-tank obstacles included ditches up to 3 meters deep, escarps, metal hedgehogs, and concrete tetrahedrons. Special attention was paid to long-term firing points. Pillboxes with embrasures for machine guns were positioned to provide crossfire on all approaches to the city. Many of them were cut into rocky ground and could withstand direct hits from medium-caliber artillery shells. When it became clear that the city faced a long siege, all civilian resources were mobilized. The city militia numbered over 12,000 people, workers, employees, students. They served in less dangerous areas, freeing up regular units to perform combat missions on the front line. Industrial enterprises in Sevastopol were repurposed for defense needs. The naval factory mastered the repair of damaged equipment and the production of mortars. At the Sevastopol marine plant, the production of hand grenades and Molotov cocktails was established, up to 2,000 pieces daily. Artillery workshops restored damaged guns and manufactured spare parts for them. Women and teenagers made up the majority of workers in these productions, working 12 to 14 hours a day. Moreover, many of them, after their shifts, went to hospitals to care for the wounded or to build fortifications. Every night, Thousands of townspeople went out to strengthen defensive lines, digging trenches, installing anti-tank obstacles, and camouflaging firing points. Under siege, maritime communications became the true arteries of life for Sevastopol. When land routes were cut off, only the sea connected the city with the mainland. Along these invisible roads, convoys of ships sailed, delivering ammunition, provisions, medicines, and reinforcements to the defenders. The Black Sea Fleet undertook the titanic task of sustaining the viability of the besieged garrison, numbering over 100,000 people. Organizing sea transport required exceptional skill. German aviation dominated the air, and enemy torpedo boats and submarines patrolled the approaches to the city. Every voyage turned into a deadly undertaking. The main transport arteries became the Sevastopol-Novorossiysk and Sevastopol-Tuapse routes. Ships covered the distance of 180 nautical miles in 18 to 20 hours, trying to pass the most dangerous sections under the cover of night. All available vessels were used to supply the city, from high-speed destroyers to fishing seiners. Cruisers and destroyers not only transported cargo, but also provided fire cover for convoys. The transports Abkhazia, Armenia, Georgia made regular voyages, delivering up to 1,000 tons of cargo and up to 2,000 reinforcements at a time. Submarines, though having limited cargo capacity, delivered especially valuable cargo: medicines, optical instruments, parts for weapon repair. Unloading ships became a special art. It was carried out only at night, under complete blackout. Smoke screens were used for camouflage. The entire process had to take no more than 4 to 5 hours, so that the ships could move away from the shore before dawn. During particularly intense periods of defense, up to 700 tons of various goods were delivered to Sevastopol daily. The evacuation of the wounded became a separate, heroic page in maritime communications. Hospital transports, despite their Red Cross markings, were subjected to fierce attacks. Medical personnel showed miracles of selflessness, performing operations directly during sea passages under bombings and shelling. During the defense, more than 26,000 wounded were evacuated from Sevastopol. To counter German aviation and fleet, Soviet sailors developed special tactics. Convoys were formed from ships with different speeds and maneuverability. Fast ships covered slower transports. Routes were constantly changed. Often, detours were used, increasing the length of the voyage but reducing the risk of encountering the enemy. Special attention was paid to camouflage. Smoke generators were installed on ships, and in critical situations, active electronic warfare measures were used. The feats of the Black Sea sailors who ensured the life of besieged Sevastopol are forever etched in the history of the Navy. The crew of the leader Tashkent, nicknamed the Blue Cruiser for its high speed, commanded by Captain Second Rank Vasily Eroshenko, broke through to the besieged city in June 42 under continuous air attacks. Having received 13 direct bomb hits, the ship managed to deliver 500 tons of ammunition and evacuate 2,500 wounded and children. December 17, 1941. The sky above Sevastopol was covered with heavy winter clouds. Dawn had not yet broken when German artillery opened hurricane fire on the defenders' positions. The second large-scale assault on the city began, a critical test for the entire defense system. Manstein, annoyed by the November failure, decided to deliver a crushing blow before winter set in. For the assault, he concentrated 4 infantry divisions, reinforced by tanks, artillery, and aviation. A total of about 75,000 men against 50,000 defenders of the city. The main blow was delivered from the northeast, in the direction of the Mekenzievi Gori, a strategic height dominating the city. By capturing it, the Germans would be able to shell all of Sevastopol and control the northern bay. Auxiliary strikes were planned in the Balaklava and Bakhchisarai directions to stretch the defending forces. German artillery fired with unprecedented intensity. Up to 100 shells per minute fell on the first line of defense. The Luftwaffe made up to 200 sorties daily, methodically bombing fortifications and urban areas. After a 2-hour artillery preparation, the infantry, supported by tanks, went on the attack. In some areas, the Germans managed to penetrate the defense to a depth of 3 kilometers. A particularly difficult situation developed in the area of Height 192 and the village of Duvankoy, where the enemy broke through the first line of defense. The commander of the Primorsky Army, Major General Ivan Petrov, urgently transferred reserves to the threatened direction: the 79th Naval Rifle Brigade and a tank battalion. The Marines counterattacked the Germans on the flank, pushing them back to their initial positions. Coastal artillery played a key role in repelling the assault. The 30th Battery, turning its guns towards the land, covered German tank columns, destroying 23 vehicles in a day of fighting. Battery number 134, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Zyka, located on the Mackenzievi Gori, fired direct fire at the advancing infantry, repelling 7 attacks. On December 26th, the situation changed dramatically. The Soviet command, anticipating a critical situation in Sevastopol, prepared a strategic surprise: a large-scale amphibious operation in the eastern part of Crimea. Units of the 44th and 51st Armies landed in the Kerch and Feodosia areas. This bold maneuver forced Manstein to urgently transfer a significant part of his forces to the east of the peninsula, weakening the pressure on Sevastopol. The December assault stalled. The Germans lost about 20,000 killed and wounded, but advanced only a few kilometers, not achieving any of their strategic goals. The city's defenders held out, demonstrating the highest skill in organizing defense and coordinating different branches of the armed forces. The coordination between ground forces and the fleet was particularly impressive. Ships of the Black Sea Fleet maneuvered in the bays, providing artillery support from the sea. The cruiser Krasny Kavkaz and the destroyers Sposobny and Soobrazitelny fired at accumulations of German equipment, adjusting their fire according to data from coastal observation posts. The December battles were of immense strategic importance. They not only thwarted the German command's plans for a quick capture of the city, but also tied up significant enemy forces, preventing them from being used in other directions. Sevastopol became an impregnable fortress, against which the waves of German attacks crashed. After the December assault was repelled, a relative lull descended upon Sevastopol. The winter of 1942 brought a temporary stabilization of the front. The German command, forced to redeploy significant forces to eastern Crimea to counter the Kerch-Feodosia amphibious landing operation, temporarily abandoned active offensive actions against the fortress city. The defenders utilized this period of calm most effectively to strengthen defenses and accumulate resources. Major General Ivan Efimovich Petrov, commander of the Coastal Army, launched extensive work to restore and reinforce defensive lines. The main focus was on creating a deeply echeloned defense. Additional trench lines were erected in the most threatened sectors, new minefields were laid, and reinforced concrete pillboxes and bunkers were constructed. Special attention was paid to anti-tank obstacles, escarps, anti-tank ditches, and demolition charges were established in all tank hazardous directions. During this period, significant reinforcements were successfully delivered to Sevastopol. The 79th and 345th Rifle Divisions, several artillery regiments, and a tank battalion arrived by sea convoys. This not only compensated for losses incurred in previous battles, but also created mobile reserves to counter potential enemy breakthroughs. A crucial task became the accumulation of ammunition, food, and medical supplies. The Black Sea Fleet, despite the increasing activity of German aviation and submarines, ensured regular supply to the city. Over 30,000 tons of various goods were delivered to Sevastopol during the winter months. This allowed for the creation of reserves sufficient for a prolonged defense. However, the situation of the defenders remained extremely complex. The city was under complete blockade from land. Supplies were delivered only by sea, and each transport voyage turned into a deadly undertaking. German aviation continuously bombed the city, destroying residential areas and port facilities. Constant artillery shelling kept the defenders on edge, even during periods of relative calm. The psychological state of the garrison and the population under these conditions became a decisive factor. The command paid special attention to maintaining morale. Theaters continued to operate in the city. The newspaper Krasny Chernomorets, Red Black Sea Sailor, was published, and radio broadcasts continued. Frontline artistic brigades performed in hospitals and at forward positions. All of this created an atmosphere of normal life in the besieged city and upheld the morale of the defenders. Meanwhile, the German command was preparing for a decisive assault. After the elimination of the Soviet bridgehead on the Kerch Peninsula in May 1942, all forces of Manstein's 11th Army were concentrated for an attack on Sevastopol. By early June, 7 infantry divisions, 2 brigades, over 200 tanks, about 600 aircraft, and more than 700 artillery pieces, including super-heavy artillery, were amassed against the city's defenders. Among these guns, the 800mm Dora mortar stood out, the most powerful artillery piece of World War II, specially brought in to destroy Sevastopol's fortifications. The city's defenders prepared for the inevitable assault. Work on the defensive lines continued around the clock. Every meter of terrain was zeroed in by artillery. Every height transformed into a strong point. Sevastopol prepared for its last, most difficult trial. Operation Sturmvogel, Assault Bird, began on June 2, 1942, with a massive German airstrike on Sevastopol. The sky above the city literally turned black from hundreds of bombers. The Luftwaffe threw over 700 aircraft into the assault on the fortress. Ju-87, Ju-88, He-111 bombers, and Me-109 fighters. This was one of the most concentrated air attacks on the Eastern Front. During the first 24 hours, German aircraft made over 2,000 sorties, dropping over 500 tons of bombs on the city and defensive positions. The Luftwaffe's tactics were methodical and merciless. The first targets were anti-aircraft batteries and airfields, then command posts, communication hubs, and artillery positions. After suppressing the air defense system, German bombers switched to residential areas, the port, and hospitals. The city turned into a sea of fire and smoke. Particularly effective were the Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, which, with a wailing sound, fell almost vertically and delivered pinpoint strikes on pillboxes, dugouts, and artillery positions. The city's defenders countered this might with heroism and skill. The Soviet anti-aircraft defense of Sevastopol by June 42 numbered about 100 anti-aircraft guns of various calibers and several dozen anti-aircraft machine guns. Fighter cover was provided by 2 aviation divisions, the 186th and the 32nd. However, the enemy's numerical superiority was overwhelming. For every Soviet aircraft, there were 5 or 6 German ones. The anti-aircraft gunners worked at the limit of human capabilities. Crews did not leave their guns for 18 to 20 hours straight, repelling wave after wave of German bombers. The story of Lieutenant Vorobyov's anti-aircraft battery became legendary. Having lost half of its personnel, it continued to fire, shooting down 5 enemy aircraft in a single day. When the shells ran out, the anti-aircraft gunners engaged in battle with the breakthrough German infantry, holding their position until reinforcements arrived. The aviation of the Black Sea Fleet, despite colossal losses, continued to carry out combat missions. I-16 and LAGG-3 fighters took off from ruined airfields, engaging in unequal battles with superior enemy forces. IL-2 attack aircraft struck advancing German columns, while bombers attacked enemy artillery positions. U-2 night bombers played a special role, using the darkness to deliver pinpoint strikes on concentrations of German equipment and manpower, not allowing the enemy to rest even at night. Air superiority became a decisive factor in the outcome of the battle for Sevastopol. Massive bombings destroyed most of the permanent fortifications, disrupted the command and control system, and significantly weakened artillery support for the infantry. German spotter planes hovered over the battlefield, directing artillery fire with pinpoint accuracy. By the end of June, the Germans had managed to completely paralyze sea communications, depriving the city's defenders of the last thread connecting them to the mainland. The air war over Sevastopol became one of the most intense in the history of the Eastern Front. It demonstrated both the power of concentrated airstrikes and the incredible resilience of the defenders, who, under unbearable conditions, continued to fight to the last bullet, to the last shell, to the last breath. On June 5, 1942, the sky over Sevastopol darkened with an armada of German bombers. Operation Sturgeon Catch began, the final assault on the fortress city. Manstein's 11th Army, reinforced after its victory on the Kerch Peninsula, unleashed the full might of its weapons on the defenders. The artillery preparation lasted 5 days, an unprecedented barrage of fire in terms of intensity, involving over 600 guns, including super-heavy artillery of special power. The main striking force of the Germans was the monstrous 800mm Dora gun, the largest artillery piece of World War II. 7-ton shells, fired from this monster, pierced 20-meter rock formations, destroying even the most protected underground structures. It was Dora that delivered a devastating blow to the 30th Battery, penetrating its armored casemates and temporarily disabling one of its turrets. German aviation carried out up to 1,000 sorties daily. Ju-87 dive bombers attacked targets in waves, dropping bombs with an accuracy of several meters. Particular attention was paid to the destruction of anti-aircraft batteries and command posts. By June 7, the city's air defense was practically suppressed, allowing German aircraft to operate almost with impunity. The Germans delivered their main blow in the northern sector of the defense, in the area of Belbek and the Mackenzie Mountains. Here, 3 infantry divisions, supported by tanks, acted against the defenders simultaneously. After hours of artillery preparation, German infantry, supported by assault guns, attacked the positions of the 90th Rifle Division and the 8th Marine Brigade. The defense was cracking at the seams. General Petrov, commander of the Coastal Army, threw in his last reserves but could not stop the offensive. By June 10, the Germans had broken through the defense in the northern sector and reached the northern bay. The 30th Battery, despite the damage, continued to fire, holding back the enemy's advance. But the forces were too unequal. True epic battles unfolded at certain lines. The legendary feat was accomplished by the defenders of Pillbox No. 11 on the slopes of the Mackenzie Mountains. 7 Marines, led by Junior Lieutenant Nikolai Filchenkov, repelled attacks from an entire enemy battalion for 24 hours. When ammunition ran out, they let German tanks get close and blew them up with bundles of grenades. Dying, but not retreating. By June 17, the situation became critical. Ammunition and food were running out. Sea communications were practically paralyzed due to the dominance of German aviation. Under these circumstances, the Stavka of the Supreme High Command made the difficult decision to evacuate the command of the Coastal Army and the Black Sea Fleet, to preserve the leadership for the continuation of the struggle. On the night of June 20, submarines and aircraft evacuated Admiral Oktyabrski, General Petrov, and key command personnel from Sevastopol. The remaining troops continued to fight, retreating to Cape Chersonesos, the last patch of Sevastopol land remaining in the hands of the defenders. By the last days of June 1942, The defenders of Sevastopol found themselves in a tragic position. The main forces were cut off on Cape Chersonesos, a narrow, rocky strip of land jutting into the sea. Here, on the last patch of Sevastopol soil, thousands of fighters continued to resist, though the outcome of the battle was already predetermined. Ammunition was running out, food was practically gone, and there was a shortage of drinking water. The wounded lay in the open. There were no medicines or dressings. German aviation strafed concentrations of people with impunity, and artillery methodically shelled every meter of the territory. Despite the hopelessness of the situation, isolated groups of fighters continued to offer organized resistance. Particularly fierce battles unfolded around the 35th Battery, which became the last stronghold of the defenders. Its underground casemates, though heavily damaged, offered some shelter from bombings and shellings. Major General Pyotr Novikov assumed command of the remaining units, attempting to organize an all-round defense and distribute the remaining ammunition. During these days, feats bordering on the impossible were accomplished. Artillerymen of the 35th Battery, having exhausted all their main caliber shells, fired their personal weapons, repelling attacks by German infantry. Black Sea sailors, when their ammunition ran out, went into bayonet charges. The wounded refused to leave their positions, continuing to fight to their last breath. A full evacuation of the garrison proved impossible for several reasons. The main one was the absolute dominance of German aviation in the air and the activity of enemy torpedo boats in coastal waters. Any ship approaching the shore was immediately attacked. Submarines could only take a few dozen people aboard, while tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians remained in Sevastopol. The second reason was the swiftness of the German offensive in the final stage. When it became clear that the city could not be held, there was no time left for an organized evacuation. The Germans cut off the roads to the bays, severing escape routes to the sea. Finally, there was a shortage of transport. Most of the Black Sea Fleet's ships had by this time been lost or severely damaged. One of the most dramatic episodes unfolded on June 28th, when a group of Black Sea sailors commanded by Senior Lieutenant Alexei Terletsky covered the evacuation of the wounded from the beach of Kamyshavaya Bay. With only 2 heavy machine guns and a few crates of grenades, they held back the onslaught of an entire enemy battalion for 5 hours. When the last boat with the wounded left the shore, all the defenders perished, but they did not retreat. The defense of Sevastopol became a unique school of military art, providing invaluable experience that was subsequently used by the Soviet command on other sectors of the front. Analyzing the tactical decisions of both sides, one can identify key factors that determine the nature of this epic confrontation. The Soviet command masterfully used the advantages of the terrain, creating a deeply echeloned defense based on long-term fortifications. The engineering equipment of positions, taking into account the complex terrain, allowed for the most effective use of limited forces to control a vast territory. The use of coastal artillery against ground targets proved particularly successful, a tactical technique previously unparalleled in military history. The German command, in turn, demonstrated a high level of organization in assaulting a fortified area. Manstein skillfully combined massive artillery strikes with air support and the actions of assault groups. However, the Germans underestimated the defenders' resilience and the power of the fortifications, which led to a protracted siege and enormous losses. The vulnerability of sea communications and the lack of sufficient fighter aircraft to counter air attacks became a weak point of the Soviet defense. It was the Luftwaffe's air superiority that ultimately determined the outcome of the battle. The experience of Sevastopol had a huge impact on the subsequent development of fortification art. Underground structures with autonomous life support systems, multi-tiered firing positions, hidden communications, all these elements were subsequently used in creating defensive lines on other sectors of the Soviet-German front. Particularly valuable was the experience of organizing anti-landing defense, which was applied in the defense of Leningrad and Soviet naval bases in the Baltic. The lessons of Sevastopol were taken into account when planning the defense of Stalingrad. The experience of creating autonomous resistance nodes capable of operating under encirclement conditions became the basis of urban combat tactics. Commanders who had passed through the Sevastopol school skillfully organized the defense of factory complexes and residential areas, turning each building into an impregnable fortress. The system of interaction between infantry, artillery, and engineering units, honed in Sevastopol, was successfully applied in the Battle of Kursk. Multi-layered minefields, anti-tank ditches, a developed network of observation posts and adjustment posts. All these elements of the Sevastopol defense became standard in creating defensive positions. Of particular importance was the experience of organizing supplies for an isolated garrison. Methods of camouflaging transports, tactics of breaking through the naval blockade, organizing unloading under enemy fire. These skills proved invaluable in supplying besieged Leningrad across Lake Ladoga. The heroic defense of Sevastopol, despite its tragic end, had enormous strategic significance. 250 days of siege tied up large enemy forces, preventing their use in other directions. The losses of German troops near Sevastopol exceeded 100,000 people. This was the price the enemy paid for capturing the fortress city. The Sevastopol epic became a symbol of the indomitable resilience of the Soviet people and went down in history as one of the most heroic pages of the Great Patriotic War. May 1944. Sevastopol, after 2 years under German occupation, was preparing for liberation. The operation to reclaim the hero city became the logical conclusion to its heroic epic. The 4th Ukrainian Front, under the command of General Tolbukin, and the separate coastal army of General Yeremenko, supported by the Black Sea Fleet, developed a storming plan that accounted for all the peculiarities of the terrain and the nature of the German defense. The Germans had turned Sevastopol into an impregnable fortress, utilizing both old Soviet fortifications and new defensive structures. The defense on Sapun Gora was particularly powerful, a commanding height controlling the approaches to the city from the east. Here, the enemy had created a multi-tiered system of trenches, pillboxes, and minefields. The slopes of the mountain were so steep that the attackers literally had to clamber upwards under a hail of fire. The offensive began on May 5th with a powerful artillery barrage. Over 2,000 guns unleashed fire upon German positions. Aviation struck at resistance nodes and enemy reserves. Ships of the Black Sea Fleet, maneuvering along the coast, supported the advancing troops with naval artillery fire. The decisive assault on Sapun Gora began on May 7th. This day became one of the most heroic in the history of the liberation of Crimea. Soviet soldiers, using assault ladders, grappling hooks, and ropes, ascended the sheer cliffs under hurricane fire. Hand-to-hand combat erupted on every tier of the defense. By evening, at the cost of incredible effort, the mountain's summit was taken. The Black Sea Fleet played a special role in the city's liberation. Marines landed several tactical assaults behind German lines, disrupting their defense system. Cutters and armored boats penetrated the bays, supporting the advancing units with fire. Fleet aviation struck at retreating enemy columns. On May 9, 1944, exactly 1 year before the end of the war, Sevastopol was fully liberated. It is symbolic that many participants in the assault were the same soldiers and officers who had defended the city in 1941, 1942. For them, the liberation of Sevastopol became an act of restoring historical justice, an opportunity to complete the work begun during the days of the heroic defense. Sevastopol in historical memory is not just a page of military chronicles. It is a living symbol whose significance only grows with years, transforming from a specific historical event into a cultural code of national self-awareness. After the end of the Great Patriotic War, Understanding the feat of the city's defenders became one of the most important tasks for preserving the historical memory of the people. The memorialization of the Sevastopol epic began almost immediately after the city's liberation. In the places of the fiercest battles, the first modest obelisks appeared, erected by the frontline soldiers themselves. Later, they gave way to monumental complexes that became the city's calling card. The diorama Assault on Sapun Gora is a unique artistic work where painting is organically combined with natural objects, creating the effect of complete presence. Visitors literally find themselves at the epicenter of the battle, seeing attacking Soviet soldiers before them and feeling the tension of the decisive assault. The memorial complex at the 35th Battery became a sanctuary for the descendants of the city's defenders. In the underground casemates, where the last dramatic episodes of the defense unfolded, a museum has been created, preserving the memory of thousands of soldiers who did not leave their posts. Here are collected personal belongings of the defenders: documents, weapons, silent witnesses of heroism and self-sacrifice. The image of Sevastopol in post-war art took a special place. Writers, artists, filmmakers turned to the theme of the city's defense, creating works that became classics. Sergei Sergeyevtsensky's novel, Sevastopol Hardship, covers both defenses of the city, showing the continuity of generations of defenders. Paintings by battle painters: Pyotr Maltsev, Vasily Nestorenko, Nikolai But recreate key moments of battles with documentary accuracy and emotional power. The cinematic chronicle of the Sevastopol epic includes such masterpieces as Malakhov Kurgan and Sea on Fire. These films do not just tell about events, they convey the atmosphere of the time, the characters of people, their motivation, and inner world. A special role was played by documentaries, where the voices of real participants in the defense are heard, passing on their memories to new generations. The transformation of Sevastopol's image into a national symbol occurred gradually. From a specific historical event, the city's defense turned into a metaphor for the resilience and unwavering spirit of the people. Sevastopol became the personification of the best qualities of the national character: courage in trials, readiness for self-sacrifice, loyalty to duty. That is why, in May 1945, Sevastopol was one of the first to receive the honorary title of Hero City, officially enshrined in 1965.